One match day down, 33 to go. Welcome in. This is Speedway Soccer on Broadway Sports Media, live on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and Twitch, and of course on the 104.5 The Zone podcast network. A lot to get into tonight as Sunday marked a few firsts for Nashville SC. First match day of the season, first meeting with the Seattle Sounders, first season opening win in the MLS era, and the first ever victory as a part of the Western Conference, a 1-0 result in the Pacific Northwest. I'm Lucas Panzica. Joining me tonight, Ben Wright, Will Bowling, Chris Ivy, Andy Simmons, our producer, lurking in the shadows. Gentlemen, good evening.
What's going on, guys? I have a fat tire here and a pair of Crocs, and I'm ready to roll tonight.
So you did wear the Crocs?
Of course, always.
Good. I'd be disappointed if not. Will?
I love it. What's going on, gentlemen? Lucas and I have now, this is the third team that we have covered today and the many hats that we wear. So grateful to be with you guys for the night. Looking forward to it.
And Chris Ivy checking in from East Tennessee. Or are you in Charlotte yet, Chris? Because I know you'll be in attendance for History in the Making this weekend.
No, I'm still in Tennessee. Still got to work tomorrow, but we'll be in Charlotte for this weekend. Looking forward. You know, you only get one time to see a new team come into MLS. We all saw the atmosphere that it was for Nashville 2 years ago, and I think Charlotte's going to be very much the same way. So looking forward to, hanging out with some friends and seeing some history made for MLS.
Yeah,
Plus longtime Nashville SC member Daniel Rios.
That's right. Maybe if we have some time later at the end of the show, get into some of that a little bit with Chris, and looking forward to get your perspective on what that atmosphere is like on Saturday. But let's dive into this. Highlights from the match, a 1-0 win against the Seattle Sounders. Aníbal Godoy with the game winner with about 20 minutes left in the 90. Ben, starting with you, if I took my phone out right now and I asked Siri, hey, Siri, what does a quintessential Gary Smith coach performance look like? Will this result immediately pop up on my phone?
Yeah, I think so. I think this is taking the 0-0 we saw in New England with Derek Jones starting at striker. I think this is taking that up a notch. I didn't think he would find a way to start Dax McCarty, Aníbal Godoy, and Sean Davis all at the same time, and he did it in the first game of the season, and it did not result in a 0-0 win, but actually full points against arguably the best team in the league. So yeah, I think this is as Gary Smith as it gets. And yeah, I mean, credit to him, credit to the team. I thought they in the past they have sat back and just absorbed pressure, but I thought they were pretty proactive, created a bunch of chances, and I thought Hani Mukhtar just kind of picked up where he left off last season, and I think that was, I mean, the win obviously was the paramount priority, but I think Mukhtar looked exceptional, and I'm excited to see that continue.
Yeah, tactically, when you look at what Nashville did, you mentioned it, the three midfielders getting Sean Davis, Dax McCarty, and Aníbal Godoy on the field at the same time. Chris, this, to me, is one of Gary Smith's most impressive personnel moves in the last two seasons with Nashville SC. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the word we all used when the lineups came out was a curveball, and that's exactly what it was. When we first saw it, we all figured, it was going to be Dax McCarty sitting in that kind of hybrid center back role that he did a few times last year. But to our surprise, he was up there, kind of in his normal positioning as a defensive midfielder. And Gary found a way to get them all in the team sheet. And it really clogged up the middle. Seattle didn't have any answers through the middle of the park. They had to resort to just attacks out wide that really isn't their forte. So kudos to Gary Smith for finding a way to neutralize the things that Seattle does best and really limiting to very few, if any, opportunities on Nashville's goal all night.
So I'll kind of leave this up to any of you three. How did this free up Dax McCarty? Like, in what way did this enable Dax McCarty to expand his game with Sean Davis and Aníbal Godoy in the field at the same time, not really restricting him to any certain role? Ben, I see you in here. What do you think? Like, how did this most positively affect Dax McCarty to have an impact?
I mean, so I think he did a ton of work defensively, but he was just able to pick his positions more. He had more freedom. He didn't have to do all the running in midfield like we've seen in the past when it's just been him and Godoy together. So I think it just freed him up. Gary Smith called him the screen in front of the back four. He was just shielding the back four and really able to just kind of read the game and pick where he thought the ball was going to be, and more often than not, he was there to win it. I thought it was a really interesting role for him. And from everything we've heard from Gary Smith, Walker Zimmerman after the game, it sounds like they're going to use this more this season.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because when you talk about the partnership that Anibal Godoy and Dax McCarty built together, they knew when one of them went forward, the other one had to stay back. And I think you get more out of these three midfield players by allowing them to kind of be themselves and take their own licenses in attack when they feel like they have the opportunity to. You can take more risks forward if you're a Sean Davis in this team, knowing that Dax McCarty and Anibal Godoy are staying back in that moment. And I think there was a specific play in the second half. Sean Davis made a run in behind and stretched the back line a bit. It just created that little bit of space in between the back line and the rest of this midfield where Hani Mukhtar and Randall Leal could take up a position there. I mean, Nashville had 47% of the ball in the second half of this game. We saw them win games at home a season ago with 30 to 35% sometimes in the first or second half or even for all 90 minutes. And I feel like having that extra piece in the midfield, I think y'all are exactly right. It took Seattle by surprise a little bit. And now I think the challenge is you kind of use the element of surprise of this formation once. Now, how do you evolve it and take the next step when other teams know it's coming?
It kind of took everybody by surprise, I think. And the way that Sean Davis was integrated, Will, I'll sort of keep it here with you. I mean, when we came into the season, like how did you view Sean Davis's role within this team? Was it like for like, in for Dax or in for Anibal Godoy? And then when you look at the way they all fit on the field together, what does that open up for Sean Davis with Dax McCarty and his duties that Ben kind of just highlighted? Anibal Godoy covered a ton of ground on Sunday, but how is Sean Davis a different player with those two guys next to or behind him, as opposed to maybe just being in there as a double pivot next to Anibal Godoy or Dax McCarty?
Well, I think you kind of get the best of both worlds of what Dax McCarty is and what Anibal Godoy is. And Gary Smith has been really complimentary of Sean Davis and just his ability on the ball. A guy that doesn't only come in with a wealth of experience, the leadership aspects of his time leading New York Red Bulls, but they really like his ability just with the ball at his feet. So I think that's something that really intrigues this entire team is the fact that Sean Davis was kind of a luxury coming into this season. When you look at the needs for Nashville SC, you might have pointed to an Alistair Johnston replacement as the glaring hole, just because it's the only member of this starting 11 for last season that isn't back with the team this year. But Sean Davis is going to really give you an opportunity to pass the torch whenever Dax McCarty decides to move on as he grows into his career still at kind of the latter stages. And you're not going to miss a beat when Anibal Godoy is out on international duty. It just gives you the ability to have the same system without having two faces always have to be the same in the middle of the field.
So let's take a step back in the lineup from that midfield we've been talking about to the four-man back line that Gary Smith opened up with. Really expected it to be three in the back, maybe Alex Moyle in there as a wing back like for like in the role of Alistair Johnston. We did not see that. Now, Ben, this from Gary Smith and his media availability earlier today as we talk about Eric Miller and his role as right back. The quote from Gary, I think over a long period of time, Eric Miller has gone from someone on the outside looking in to someone who's made a real claim on that right back position. At this moment in time, he is our most natural right-sided fullback. How did you come into the season, and what context did this play out in your mind? Was it as Nashville with the back four as Eric Miller, the full-time guy, or was it Nashville coming in with three in the back like they played out most, at least of the end of last season, with Alex Moyle running up and down the flanks?
I think it's a bit of both. I expected it to be the back five, and I expected it to be Eric Miller. And I'll still go back to their playoff run. Alex Moyle and Eric Miller were both healthy. Alistair Johnston was playing more as a right-sided center back in that back three, and Gary Smith went with Eric Miller. And I think that spoke volumes at the time to just where he saw those two in terms of the right wing back position. And it's what we saw through preseason. Every time the first choice group, if you want to call it that, was out there, it was Eric Miller. And Gary Smith said that he thinks Alex Moyle will get minutes there, especially before they return home. I mean, I think they're kind of just viewing it as a grind these next 7 games. And he mentioned that Alex Moyle is a more attacking option at right wing back. So I mean, I'm sure that there will be games once they get home where they want to play on the front foot more and they go with a more aggressive lineup. And I'm sure Alex Mule will get chances there. So, I mean, I think from the moment it's Eric Miller, it doesn't feel like it's completely set in stone, locked down like it was with Alistair Johnston. And I think it's going to be more of a competition. And I still think that they are going to sign someone in the summer. But for now, I think the two of them are the options. And I think right now it's Eric Miller.
Yeah, and just building off of that quote from Gary Smith saying Miller will be difficult to dislodge from his current right back spot, but that Alex Muyl showed well there in preseason, especially offensively, and expects him to get minutes there over the next few games. So, Chris, I'll throw it to you here. Will and I kind of had this conversation on the Nashville Soccer Show earlier this week, and I kind of brought it up. Maybe it's an unfair stigma that got placed on Eric Miller from his first couple of performances in the Nashville shirt very early on in that debut 2020 season. Some big mistakes that almost directly led to goals in the opener against Atlanta and then at Portland Timbers. Then the pandemic came along and Nashville kind of came out of it looking a little bit differently, and Miller never really had that full-time spot back. And every time he was asked to do a job, I feel like he did it sufficiently well since that, opening stretch of the 2020 season, but still feel like he never, I guess, got that credit, was never viewed as that full-time guy in that role. Do you think that's fair? And do you think that maybe he's shaken that?
Yeah, I think he's shaken it. I think the one thing is that supporters naturally, in how they are, that they're going to look for a more attacking option. It's more exciting. So that's kind of the reason why I think a lot of people were kind of hoping to see Alex Muyl take that right wing back spot. But it's not for something that Eric Miller has or hasn't done. He's been steady. Going back to what Ben said, he is the guy that Gary Smith trusted when the playoffs were here, when the games truly mattered. And to me, that speaks volumes. If you have the manager's trust, and especially one with Gary who hasn't had that many slip-ups while he's been here, then you certainly have earned that right. Now, I think Nashville probably still will go out and see what's out there in the summer market if they do want to upgrade with a more attacking option at wing back, especially if they do go back to that kind of three center back with the higher up wing back system. But for last Sunday, Eric Miller was the right choice. If you're going to do a back four with a more traditional fullback in that role, that's not a spot that you want to put Alex Muyl in. He's never played that position, and Eric Miller absolutely made sense in that scenario.
So with that said, Ben, how does Jack Mayer kind of factor into all this? Whether it's back five with the wing backs or it's four in the back like we saw on Sunday, I mean, how does Jack Mayer fit into the picture?
Yeah, I mean, I still think long-term he's first choice back there. I mean, like Will said, I think this is not going to be used every week. So I still think the back three that we saw for most of last season, especially once they get home, I mean, it's a little bit counterintuitive, but that is their best attacking option. It frees up Mukhtar, Sapong, Leal, whoever's starting on that front line. So I think you're going to see that traditional back three more. I mean, they're really high on Jack Mayer. I mean, they obviously drafted him highly, but he's performed well in his first two seasons. He was a consistent starter last season. He's the long-term option there, and they're going to want to get him on the field whenever they can. So I don't think the fact that they kind of pivoted to this 4-1-3-2 against Seattle is a long-term indicator of where he stands. I think it was, to me, it seems more like it was a specific game plan for that specific match. If they keep using that over the next couple games, maybe we can talk about it then. But I don't think it necessarily says anything about Mayer's long-term future.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think we're going to see Gary Smith use teams and use shapes that are there to do very specific jobs on the road. I mean, over these first 8 games, Gary Smith has talked about the challenge of Minnesota and how it's equally as big as what they got against Seattle. It's different, but it's equally as big. I think that's how this team wants to approach each of these 8 games and just be fit and be confident going into May 1st against Philadelphia. Whatever that takes at this point, I think you're going to see a lot more of Jack Mayer. I think you're going to see more of Alex Muyl in that new role. I think you're going to see more of Ake Loba. I just think the theme of what this team is right now is go with what you know and go with what gives you your highest floor of all of these teams that you could possibly pick. And I think right now, the shape you saw against Seattle, I mean, they didn't allow a shot on target until the final 10 minutes of the game. I believe it was the 86th minute when Seattle finally had an attempt to try to test Joe Willis, that formula is going to work perfectly. So for right now, I think exactly what you saw against Seattle is going to be the formula on the road for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's hard to argue that formula. The way they were able to successfully push everything out to the flanks, feel like that is just a textbook Gary Smith against a good free-flowing attacking side like Seattle projects to be this season. The way they were able to execute that and force the danger from the flanks where Nashville really has its strengths defending that, especially with Walker Zimmerman in the middle, and he had himself a great game. Everything kind of went according to plan, right? And early on, you've got Hani Mukhtar getting plenty of touches, plenty of time in the final third. He looked sharp. There didn't appear to be any sluggishness. But we kind of had this question in the rundown. Was this look a little too Hani dependent in this first match? So I want to ask you, Chris, where's the line kind of drawn between giving Hani the freedom to create an open space where we've seen him at his best and being too dependent on Hani to provide the spark in the final third? How does this team kind of walk that line?
Yeah, I mean, I think this team has been too Hani dependent for the last couple of years, but on the road against Seattle, I think that's something Gary Smith is okay with. His concern was more of gumming up that central midfield, making sure that Seattle, with all of their incredible attacking pieces, weren't going to able to get those shots on target or even real attempts that would scare Joe Willis. So, yeah, on the road against Seattle, you can be a little bit more Hani dependent. I'm going to be looking more for, okay, when Nashville does finally open its new stadium and returns home to Nashville, what does it look like then? Are there other goal scorers or other members who can kind of create those opportunities in the attack for Nashville besides Hani? And let's not all say that we were too Hani dependent either, though, because it was Randall Leal who came up with that great ball across the box that led to the Anibal Godoy goal.
Yeah, I think this team is going to find different ways to get Hani Mukhtar involved in his best role in this team. And I thought it was interesting. Gary Smith had Randall Leal kind of playing behind Hani Mukhtar at times in this match against Seattle, something we really haven't seen ever in their time in Major League Soccer together, where Hani is almost playing as a second striker. And then behind him, Randall Leal is playing as closer to a number 10 in this role as the team kind of sprung forward in attack. I thought that was interesting. But, I think at the end of the day, this is going to come down to Sean Davis connecting the back line and connecting the defense with the attack. When you talk about a guy that was second in MLS and passes into the final third a season ago, a guy that led MLS in interceptions, I think as he gets more comfortable in this team, he's going to be that connecting link to whoever those two strikers are, whether that's Hani Mukhtar, CJ Sapong, Ake Loba, or Teal Bunbury, who also really played a big role in springing this final move for Anibal Godoy's goal. I think Sean Davis takes a lot of that pressure off of Hani Mukhtar, and going back to the conversation we had a minute ago, Lucas, it gives them a different creative focal point within that team, and specifically on the counterattack.
And let's be real here too. I mean, this is why Ake Loba was brought in. They paid $6.8 million for him to be another option besides Hani Mukhtar and to take maybe some of that creative burden off of him. And I think for me, this is the real question for Nashville this season, is if they can start to be more proactive and dictate games more. And obviously, I'm not saying that about this road stretch. I think that, we've talked about it. I think you just kind of try to survive, keep your head above water, snag a couple results here and there, and just really stay in contention until you get home. But I think once they get home and they have a longer stretch of home games, they're going to be playing some worse teams at home. I think the real question is, can they dictate games more than they did last year? Can they be more proactive? Can they be more ruthless? We saw them draw 9 games at home last year, and there were just moments where they had chances to score a second or a third goal and really kind of kill the game off, and they didn't. And I think that's the big question for me this year, is if they can do that. And I think however they do that, it can't just fall on Hani Mukhtar. And I think that's where guys like Randall Leal, Ake Loba, CJ Sapong, Handwala Bwana, whoever these more attacking creative players are in the team, that's where they have to step up. And I think that's a huge question for me this year.
But Ben, I'm kind of hung up on this though idea of Nashville SC being too reliant on Mukhtar. Like, is it them being too reliant on number 10, or is it him
Yeah.
just being their best player? Like
I don't think it's too reliant. I think it's more that there's not another option besides him. Like,
Sure.
I think they'd be happy for him to score whatever 16 goals, 12 assists again. I think he's capable of that. I think the problem is that if outside of him, who else is there? I mean, CJ Sapong was good last year, but he scored 1 goal in the final 2 months of the season. Randall L has had moments, but he's not been a consistent scorer. And so I think that, I mean, again, that's why you bring in Ake Loba. You need a reliable option to score goals besides Hani Mukhtar. And so I don't think the problem is that they've been too reliant on Hani Mukhtar. I just think they need other players to step up and create some, because as good as he was last year, I mean, first of all, that's just hard to do consistently year in and year out. And as good as he was last year, he had games where he didn't score, and there wasn't necessarily anyone else who would consistently step up and do it if he wasn't. So yeah, I mean, I think just based on transfer fees and kind of the role in the squad, that falls a lot on Ake Loba.
So with that said, the performance of Teal Bunbury in this game off the bench, I think maybe we should give him a little more credit for at least initiating the attack that ultimately led to the Anibal Godoy goal, as the ball, it was saved by Frine, kind of bounced out to Leal, who picked out Godoy on the back post. Should we have any element of concern that was not a role for Ake Loba to come in and provide a spark in a scoreless game? I thought Bunbury was fine, but Loba comes in, same deal as last year, right? After 80 minutes have been played, and they just kind of throw him on to see if he can provide something. But I don't know. Is that, like, Chris, is that me being too harsh on Gary Smith, or is that just not what Loba's role is going to be within this team?
I just don't think that's going to be the role that Loba has with this team. Gary Smith has said it before. He sees Loba a lot more akin to Hani Mukhtar in what they do on the pitch and where they operate. So when we do have this kind of 2-striker setup, Gary's always going to lean to have that more, target forward number 9 who can come back and link in possession, which CJ Sapong does. And Teal Bunbury in this game was that like-for-like replacement. I don't think Gary thought he needed to really mix things up at that point. I think Nashville coming into this match would have been perfectly happy with a 0-0 draw. 1 point in Seattle is not a bad result at all. So if things are going well, he wasn't looking necessarily for that spark. He was looking for somebody to do the same job that CJ was.
Yeah, and I think too, I mean, that's why we saw, I mean, we didn't see it. We heard about the 3-4-3 in preseason, just kind of as a way to get Mukhtar and Loba on the field at the same time without kind of sacrificing that target forward option. So yeah, I mean, I agree with Chris. It really seems like Gary has specific categories of player that he always wants to have on the field. And I mean, we've seen this all the way through USL to now. He wants a target forward, a more traditional number 9. And it doesn't seem like Ake Loba matches that kind of profile that he has. So you just have to figure out more creative ways to get him on the field. And I think the 3-4-3 seems like an obvious way to do it. And I don't think on the road against Seattle is the place to try that. So, I mean, I would be shocked if the system that they used all through preseason just is abandoned and never used again this season. I think we'll see it plenty, but I just don't think right now is the time for that.
And I know we need to wrap this up, but is that almost a deeper problem in and of itself then, that we don't see Ake Loba as that, the clear-cut number 9? Isn't that what we talked about the entirety of 2021? That's what this team is missing. That's the missing piece of the puzzle. And then here comes a record transfer fee signing, and now here we are on March 3rd, 2022, saying, well, he doesn't really fit that role. It has to be in this formation to be able to get him on the field with Hani Mukhtar. Is that just kind of a deeper problem, Will, in and of itself?
Well, it's a good problem to have in the grand scheme of things, because you look at any of the top teams in Major League Soccer and they're having the same discussion. I mean, you're going to see a team in Minnesota, Adrian Udu comes off the bench and almost scores a winner in the 93rd. He's not picked over Luis Amaria and some of these other guys that are top talents in Major League Soccer that Adrian Heath has at his disposal. So I don't necessarily think this is a really big issue. I think that Ake Loba is going to get plenty of opportunities, and we're only 1/34th of the way through here. It's obviously easy to see this as a carryover from what Loba's identity in the team was last season, but the returns from him on preseason are really good. Gary Smith seems really happy with the player, and I think he fits well into this culture. He's just got to pick the right moment to give himself the jump start into 2022. And I think just because perhaps your toughest challenge of the entire year wasn't that opportunity, I think he's going to get that opportunity to make the runs in behind and show his creativity and his skill.
And I think, too, it's only a problem if you're not winning. And that win against Seattle, I think, will go a long way. And if results continue and if they come out of this road stretch kind of with their heads above water, I think it'll be fine. I think the real time it becomes a concern is if they hit a bad run of form. Then you kind of wonder, well, why haven't they been playing Loba more? What if they had a secondary scoring option? I think that's when it becomes a problem. But I think right now they can live with it.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it's not easy to find negatives after a 1-0 win at the Seattle Sounders. So we'll wrap up the game with this because we have it in here, a man of the match discussion. But unless somebody, if you disagree with me, chime in here. But I think we're all on the same page here that it's Anibal Godoy and that he had an incredibly strong case, regardless of whether or not he scored the game-winning goal, which he did. Really, nobody had a bad game in this outing on Sunday. So we'll wrap it up with this. Is this a statement win for Nashville SC? I saw a lot of this after Sunday, and I'll go ahead and you guys tell me if I'm off base. I said no. I didn't see it as a statement win. Maybe the better word to use for me would be trademark win. I mean, for me, it's fine to be surprised that Nashville went into Seattle and won against one of the most talented teams in MLS. It's a difficult thing to do. But to act like this is a big statement about Nashville's arrival to me doesn't make a lot of sense. If you didn't think Nashville's style would hold up and be competitive in this game, and I feel like you haven't been paying a lot of attention to Nashville SC. They won on their terms. Am I reading too much into that, Chris?
I think it's not a statement win so much for Nashville fans because, like you're saying, it was that Gary Smith trademark win. But on a national perspective and for the teams in the Western Conference, I think it absolutely was a statement win. Unfortunately, being here in East Tennessee, I've got to be subjected to, ESPN Plus feeds, which is always the home market's feed. And the way Seattle's broadcasters were talking, you would think we were still stuck in 2020, that this was this park the bus team that has no chances and doesn't do anything offensively. And I think it really took them seeing it up close in person to understand that, no, that's not who Nashville is. And yes, they can play their trademark brand of soccer and come into Seattle and pull off a 1-0 win. So for Nashville supporters, it's a lot more the same, though. It was nice to see a win. But I think those Western Conference teams are now on notice that Nashville's here to play.
Yeah, Chris took the words right out of my mouth. I think the national statement that this sends is that Nashville isn't only getting 1-point results on the road against big teams now. They can get 3-point results. And the 19 draws last year and just the 4 losses, the biggest theme of this season for me, guys, is going to be how does Nashville turn the 1-point performances last year that were good into 3-point performances. They've got a deeper bench. They've got more attackers with MLS experience. And the guy that doesn't have MLS experience, we just got done talking about, almost cost him $7 million. They've got enough pieces in this thing to change the team a little bit, change the shape, but still go out and have the same result and pick up 3 points against big teams in MLS. And I think that's the statement they sent, is that this team isn't just here to pick up a point anymore and be happy about it. The expectations are higher, and with that comes the expectation that you're going to go beat a Seattle on the road every now and then.
Yeah, that's fair. Chris's comments kind of reflect what I was saying, I think, because you're talking about Seattle's broadcast team, Chris, right? That Nashville's a park the bus kind of team, talking about early 2020. That to me strengthens what I'm saying about, if you think it's this big statement thing, you just haven't been paying attention to Nashville. But at the same time, there is this narrative of Nashville happy to get out of there with a point, and that's fair because Nashville reached the MLS record for draws in the season. So totally fair, but at the same time, it's kind of a misconception about this park the bus team that we talk about all the time, where Nashville was really a lot more free-flowing than people give them credit for. So maybe it's a balance of both. I don't know, but I guess certainly as it being the opener in the Western Conference, I guess it does send a message at least to the rest of the conference. Let's move on here. Let's preview this game against Minnesota United Saturday at 5 o'clock Central kickoff on the road. And Will, keep it with you. Will Bowling on the call, iHeartRadio digital feed on Saturday. Will, I mean, just what stands out here about Minnesota? They kicked off the MLS season, a 1-1 draw against Philadelphia Union. What stands out about Minnesota United and kind of the way they match up?
Yeah, I think Gary Smith hit the nail on the head today, talking with the media, saying that it's a team that resembles Nashville in a lot of ways. You talk about the veteran back line that they have, Tyler Miller playing in goal and his experience playing with Walker Zimmerman at LAFC. But it's easy to forget in the craziness of MLS's back and the frenzy of what the 2020 season was here in Nashville. We were so focused on our own team here locally that it's easy to let results like Minnesota slip through the cracks in 2020. And before Tyler Miller even joined their team, they were in the Western Conference Final just 2 years ago. Adrian Heath has built something really good there in just a short amount of time. Like Gary Smith, he's the only manager the team has ever had in Major League Soccer. The diversity they have in attack is something that really jumps out to me. They add Luis Amarilla over the offseason. Emmanuel Reynoso is terrific, led them in assists and goals combined a season ago. They just have so many kinds of players like Emmanuel Reynoso in this team. Robin Lode scores the first goal of 2022 against Philadelphia at the weekend as well. So Franco Fragapane on the wing. I mean, you can just go on and on about the experience they have, the big money that they have in their attack, but moving some pieces around without their starting left back, without their starting right back over the weekend in Philly, they still get a pretty good point for that team. But that's a cool stadium, Alliance Field up there in St. Paul. It is a tough environment to play in. It's going to be cold at 39 degrees expected with some freezing rain throughout the day up there in Minnesota. So you can expect the full rainy night in St. Paul kind of vibe, similar to how you got, the full Seattle vibe with all the rain up there. It is going to be vintage road day at Minnesota, and nothing's going to come easy.
Ben, what do you think? I know you've kind of been in tune here with Minnesota United. What stands out to you?
I mean, I think you can't talk about Minnesota without talking about Emmanuel Reynoso, yes. Who is just, I mean, this is not a slight to Hani Mukhtar or anybody else, but I think just as far as traditional, like pure number 10s, he's maybe the best in MLS. Every time he gets the ball, he's a threat. He can pick a pass better than anyone in MLS. He's lethal in and around the box. He's great from set pieces. But Gary Smith talked about it earlier today. Like, there's a real danger that you get so focused in on him that you spring a leak somewhere else. And I mean, this is a Minnesota team who have really put the pieces together. I mean, let's not forget, they had one of the worst starts ever as an expansion side. And really, it's pretty remarkable how quickly they've turned things around just in the past couple of years. They've made a lot of smart free agent acquisitions, and they've really built a team around Reynoso as well. So I think, like Smith said, you have to focus on shutting down Reynoso, but you also kind of have to keep all these other players in the back of your mind. They're just a really capable team with a pretty clear identity. They're very similar to Nashville in that it's defense first, but they have some pretty special playmakers in attack, and I think it's going to be an interesting matchup to see how Nashville's defense goes from handling arguably the best attacking team, definitely in the Western Conference in Seattle, to kind of a more under the radar team who on their day they can play with the best of them.
Yeah, I was going to say they just kind of played a team like that, right? In Seattle, where you worry about stopping someone here and then springing a leak elsewhere. Will had the stat last weekend. The Nashville held Jordan Morris, obviously totally different position, not a number 10 whatsoever, but held Jordan Morris to 14 touches on Sunday. He was subbed off and essentially was invisible for the majority of the match. It was really a masterclass in defending against Seattle's attack. So how does that change here, Chris, with Reynoso as the centerpiece of this attack, just a central attacking talent? How does Nashville's shape potentially need to change here to try and replicate that performance?
I think, honestly, we may end up seeing something very similar to last week. I don't think that's a formation or a set of tactics that we'll always use. But for the reasons why we're talking, that Minnesota, the way they set up the attacking pieces that they have, a strong number 10 in Reynoso, good wingers on the outside, that it's kind of the similar problems that you would face in Seattle. So I think you do kind of the same thing. You muck up the midfield, you deny those opportunities. The one thing that I'm going to be watching for is last week in Seattle, they didn't have their star striker, Raul Ruiz, who was out with an injury. But Emery is going to be there for Minnesota. And he was with Minnesota back in 2020, scored the first 2 matches there before COVID hit, and then wasn't the same when MLS returned. He went back out on loan, back to Ecuador, and now he's finally back in Minnesota on a full transfer. And if they can get him going to the point that it was starting to flash at the beginning of 2020, that's going to be a really dangerous side. So to see how Amarilla does and how Nashville looks to stop him, that's going to be the real test for me.
Yeah, Luis Amarilla, his first time with Minnesota, he famously said when he joined the team, I'm going to score 25 goals here this season. Well, he scored 2, and Adrian Heath said, and getting him back before this season, said, all right, 2 down, 23 to go. Let's go. I mean, it's a guy with a lot of ambition, high expectations leading the line there. And similarly to how we're talking about Nashville and the competition for places that they have, I mean, you're leaving a guy in Adrian Unu, I already mentioned this, on the bench, who's a designated player who comes over from the number 1 league in France. And, he comes on and just plays a couple of minutes at the end of the game against Philadelphia. So it's incredible the depth of attacking talent that this team has. It's going to have to be a 90-minute shift defensively and the same plan from Seattle.
Okay, predictions. Let's close out the preview of this Minnesota United game. Can Nashville do it? Can they do the unthinkable here? Take 6 points from its first 2 road matches in Minnesota United on Saturday. Let's start with Chris. What you got?
Can they? Yes, absolutely. They showed it last week. Will they? I'm going to say 1-1 draw on this one. I think Minnesota's at least got 1 goal in them, given those attacking pieces. But that's by no means a bad result. I think anybody would take 1 point out of this match. It's going to be one of the tougher Western Conference road games that Nashville will have this year. And they've already banked away a couple extra points in Seattle. So that's my guess, is 1-1 draw.
Ben?
Yeah, I'm going to say 1-1 draw as well. I could easily see them winning this. And I also don't think a loss means the sky is falling by any means. But yeah, I mean, I think Nashville, we've seen it before. They are good at limiting chances on the road, and they're happy to play an ugly game if it means getting out of there with a point. And I don't think there's any shame in that, especially at this early stretch of the season.
All right, Will, you are on the call on Saturday, so no prediction from you. But if Nashville is to come out of here with 6 points in its first 2 matches, specifically, what's one thing that needs to happen?
I think Chris hit the nail on the head. Make this game as ugly as you possibly can. It's not going to be good field conditions. It's not going to be comfortable outside. This is not a game for free-flowing football for either team. I think this one could come down to a set piece on either side. Nashville was good at defending those set piece opportunities for Seattle. They looked dangerous on a couple of those opportunities against the Sounders. I think it's a game that comes down to 1 or 2 moments, and on a wet field on a really cold day, this is anybody's ball game.
You're screaming draw at our faces, Will. Everybody here, I'm with all of y'all. 1-1 draw is what I got. Andy Simmons, producer, has a 2-1 Nashville SC win. But yeah, I'm with you guys, Ben and Chris. It's another a classic Gary Smith approach, but maybe with more of a Gary Smith road result. Classic Gary Smith road result. 1-1 draw. You could certainly do worse coming out of these first 2 games with 4 points. And I'm gonna do this at every single show this season. We should do just a segment called Set Piece Defense Watch. Will and I talked about it on the Nashville Soccer Show on Tuesday. Talking point throughout the entire course of 2021. Like Will said, Nashville defended them well against Seattle, a 1-game sample size, but going to continue to have my eyes on it. I'm going to go Nashville 1-1 draw with the Walker Zimmerman header from a corner kick with Nashville scoring on a set piece. But we'll just kind of continue to monitor the set piece defending that really crippled this team last season. So that will wrap up our preview of Minnesota United. Before we kind of wrap up with a few bullet points on the way out, Will, how can people listen? How do people tune in on Saturday?
Yeah, so we are just on the iHeartRadio app, Nashville SC, just right there. Pretty easy to find if you just search for it. We will be on the air 30 minutes before kick, so a 4:30 pregame, 5 o'clock, a little after 5 o'clock kickoff with myself and Kelly Glendenning. Going to be a fun call.
All right, Will Bowling on the call as West Bowling heads to Finland to hang out with Pecorine for the next few days. All right, guys, some headlines here on the way out around Europe. Roman Abramovich is selling Chelsea. I mean, this kind of started as him ceding control, and it has transitioned to him selling the club. This is massive news, obviously, in the midst of this war as Russia invades Ukraine. I mean, very serious situation there that has sort of combined politics and soccer. I mean, what do you guys kind of make of this, Ben? Like, did this almost start as a PR move from Abramovich, you think, that just kind of snowballed into this? Like, I wonder what led to this. What do you think?
Yeah, I have a lot of mixed thoughts on this. I mean, obviously, I think the situation in Ukraine is heartbreaking and frustrating, and I'm angry about it. And so I think it's a little bit hard for me to separate the two. I struggle to give Abramovich too much credit here because I think the sanctions have forced his hand. And I've seen so much reaction on Twitter just talking about what a great owner is and how he's doing the selfless thing to take care of the club. I mean, and that may be true. I'm not like in those conversations with him, but to me, it just seems like he knows that he's screwed, and he's trying to get out from as much as possible. So yeah, I honestly just struggle to give him much credit here at all. I think if you separate all the political stuff, I think he's been a great owner for Chelsea. But I think right now, I mean, I struggle to give him a lot of credit for selling a club when his hand is being forced.
Will, Chris, I mean, you guys have anything on top of that?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's good riddance. The people defending him on Twitter shows you the power of sport washing, of people tied to some really bad people and some really bad regimes, and how they can remake and use sports as a PR mechanism to kind of shield them from that criticism. So to any point that he's, propping up Putin at this point, good riddance that he's gone.
And like, let's be honest too. I mean, this is not an isolated incident. Like especially in the Premier League, we're seeing it more and more with like the takeover of Newcastle. I mean, there are some huge ethical concerns there. I mean, the World Cup coming up in Qatar. I think there is, especially at the top levels of football around the globe, just when there's that much money involved, there is just as much corruption involved. And so I think it's hard because we romanticize the sport, and you want to put your team on a pedestal and support your owner. But the reality is just a lot murkier than that, and a lot of times it's ugly. And so, I mean, in this case, I think it's a good thing that Abramovich is getting out, but let's not pretend like the problem's fixed now. I mean, it's going on everywhere.
Man, I wish our guy Davey Shepard was here to give his 2 cents on this. But since he is not here, I'll basically say what he tweeted the other day, which I think is a pretty fair point. Kind of in the middle of this is you can say what you will about the guy as a person. He invested a lot of money and was a very involved, and he was a good owner for Chelsea. I mean, he won a lot. He brought them to levels they've never been before, and that's all fair and good. But I will at least take joy in the fact there's one less Russian oligarch in a sport that I love, and that is about as simple as I could make it.
Well, it's a good week if you are not particularly a fan of Chelsea Football Club, as we rewind to the Carabao Cup Final from last weekend. Oh, gentlemen, you guys know how much I love a good penalty shootout. Let me tell you, this was ecstasy for me over the weekend, okay? Watching this thing go 11 rounds all the way down to the goalkeepers. The only thing that would have made it better be a little bit of drama mixed in with a save and a response from another save. But no, it was clinical. All 10 outfield players nailed their penalties. And then in comes Kepa, who is subbed in at the end of the 120. By the way, phenomenal scoreless game. I mean, one of the best scoreless 90 minutes I have ever seen. And then in comes Kepa for Benjamin Mendy, who had just a fantastic performance, was a brick wall for 120 minutes. Not only does he go 0 for 10, does not save a single penalty, he skies his, and Liverpool wins the Carabao Cup final. I mean, Will, did you? I relished in it because I'm just a sucker for a penalty shootout. Will, I think you relished in it because Chelsea ended in heartbreak.
Yeah, I mean, either way, I was going to be happy. Like, either Jurgen Klopp wasn't hugging everyone on the field or Chelsea lost. Like, it was kind of a win-win for those of us that don't wear either of those badges. But no, I mean, the Kepa thing is really interesting. I mean, the guy had been really good in penalty shootouts. It kind of feels like a very, very big outlier in what has been a terrific career for him. You go back to the Super Cup, all the moments that he has had in penalty shootouts, but I mean, it is pretty bad. I mean, Edouard Mendy was the man of the match of the game, too.
Yeah.
For one, it's one thing to take your guy out and put in a penalty shootout guy, when you've got a good goalkeeper. You had the team of the year goalkeeper in your team. I mean, not just on FIFA. Like, this guy is one of the best goalkeepers in the world right now, Edouard Mendy. I just have a hard time taking that guy off in that moment.
Did I say Benjamin Mendy? I did
yes,
say Benjamin Mendy.
It's okay. It's been a long day.
Ben, it was kind of a hindsight 2020 deal, right? Because nobody's sitting there questioning the decision. You just feel bad for Mendy because he played so well, didn't have the opportunity to actually win the game. But ultimately, it was probably the right decision. It just ended in hilarity.
Lucas, you had some great penalty shootouts within the past couple months.
Oh,
I was going to say the same
Italy
thing.
to win the Euros, Manchester United in the Europa.
That was even better. That was even better. United and Villarreal in the Europa League final. Oh my God.
Switzerland, France too in the Euros.
Yeah.
That was a good one.
Yeah,
then you had Nashville against Philadelphia.
Oh God.
Oh man,
too soon for that.
One of these things is not like the other. Yeah. No. Yeah. I mean, listen. You guys know, I love a good penalty shootout. I hope to see more in the coming days in the FA Cup and in the Champions League. Give me all of the penalty shootouts. Okay, let's wrap this up on a little bit of American soccer news, as Leeds has hired Jesse Marsch to take over for Marco Bielsa. And he had some comments today and brought this up. This is the real conversation of the night. Is Ted Lasso bad for American soccer? See it on First Take tomorrow with Stephen A. and Mad Dog Russo. I mean,
oh my gosh,
it was interesting because Marsch, if anybody hadn't seen the clip, Marsch was asked about the stigma of an American coach coaching in the Premier League, and he was chuckling about it. Said, "Yeah, I don't think Ted Lasso really helped." But it's funny because he says, Ted Lasso didn't really help with the stigma. Then he goes on this long soliloquy about his move to Europe and learning German and connecting with people. And it's just incredible what the human spirit can achieve. And then sort of realizes in the moment that everything he just said sounds like a quote out of a episode of Ted Lasso. I thought that was so funny. But on a real note, I honestly thought he came off kind of well here. Like I thought he showed off sort of a self-awareness that might endear him to maybe some skeptical fans, which there are most certainly some skeptical fans. I mean, did any of y'all have that same reaction?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to look no further than just his time in Salzburg and Leipzig. I mean, he went over and immediately learned German, immediately connected with the players, got great results in Salzburg, not so much in Leipzig, but I think you're seeing. I mean, I think after he's left has kind of validated him some. It's just a dumpster fire. So I mean, I've been high on him for a while. I think he's the best American manager currently in the game. I think it's going to be an uphill fight. I mean, we've seen. I agree with him. I think there is a stigma against European managers. I mean, I think we saw it with Bob Bradley. I don't think he got a fair shake at Swansea. But this does seem like a Leeds team that kind of has principles set that they believe in. And we saw with Bielsa. I mean, they stuck with him for a long time, even after I think many other teams would have fired him and moved on. So I think it seems like he has a shot to stay there for a while. I mean, they gave him a long-term contract. They seem like they're behind him. The players seem like they're a good fit for his style. So I mean, I'm optimistic, and I'm just excited to see an American manager get another shot kind of at the top level. And I think if there is anyone in the game currently who can do it, I think it's Jesse Marsch.
It's a good fit too. Leeds is set up for Jesse Marsch. I think that was one of the problems with going to Leipzig was while they were in that Red Bull system under Nagelsmann, they kind of had played back a little bit and a little bit more possession oriented. Whereas Leeds is fully set up from day one to play the kind of brand of soccer that Jesse Marsch wants to impose. The real question is can he survive the drop? You've got to kind of iron out some of the defensive deficiencies that Leeds has shown over the last couple of weeks, which led to Bielsa's firing. But if he can survive this season, I think long term, this is a really good spot for Jesse Marsch to land in.
I am curious about, I know it's a good point, Chris, about maybe not a compatible style at Leipzig, but I am curious about maybe some of the elements of the counterattacking, styles in Germany, how much of an influence that had on Marsch in his time there, and how much of that I know that that's an element of his game already, but I'm just intrigued to see how this plays. Like, are we all waiting with bated breath to see how Jesse Marsch does at Leeds?
I mean, it's not a great way to start your first job in the Premier League. I mean, you think about saving teams from the drop. I mean, Big Sam Allardyce, was he busy? Like, did you get a busy signal when you tried to call him? Like, I don't know if a time to start a new project is after you've conceded just stupid amount of goals in a month and you're near relegation. Like, I'm almost a little surprised. I mean, obviously you're not going to say no to your first Premier League opportunity, but like, it was this the best offer out there for Jesse Marsch? Like, I wouldn't want anything to do with this kind of job just because of what happened with Bob Bradley at Swansea. I'm fascinated by it, but I don't think I'm as optimistic just because it's a tough time to start a new project after a guy in Bielsa who is famous for just his attention to detail and the intricacies of what his project was.
I mean, I think the one thing I would say to that too, I mean, you saw Bielsa come and take the job when they were still in the championship, and you're talking about arguably one of the biggest managers in the world at the time. So I think Leeds, I would put them alongside a team like Newcastle, who is almost bigger than the league that they're playing in. So I think, I mean, and also you're still in the Premier League. Like, there's still a chance. I mean, we've seen them go toe-to-toe with some of the better sides in the league. The players are good. It's obviously a bad situation, but I mean, I think as a manager, you're always going to bet on yourself that you can go in and turn it around. And so I think as much as there's some uncertainty, I think Marsch probably is looking at it like a challenge that he wants to see if he can take this team who are in bad shape but clearly have the talent and turn them around and keep them up. And if he can keep them up, I mean, he's buying himself even more time. I mean, he has a 3-year contract. If he saves them, I mean, he's going to go into next season with a ton of goodwill and a transfer window to really make this team his own.
Be interesting to see, especially in the summer window, if he kind of brings in any American personnel that might fit that style. Yeah, I'm fascinated by it. So we'll kind of see what happens. Chris, before we get out of here, like we said off the top, you will be in Charlotte on Saturday as they open up their MLS era against LA Galaxy, no less. So just sort of preview that for us. What kind of environment do you expect? What's the buzz kind of like in Charlotte? I know you don't live in Charlotte, but you have friends there and you will be in attendance. So, set the table for us on that.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a raucous, fun atmosphere, a lot like what we saw with Nashville back in 2020 when they had their first game. They'll have a lot of people who are just general soccer fans attending maybe an MLS game for the first time. And then, the friends that I'm bringing and dragging to the match, they're sports fans. They aren't necessarily the biggest soccer fans in the world, but they're certainly intrigued to have this new professional team in their city. And I think you get a lot of that. You don't sell 75,000 tickets and not have some excitement and some buzz in that city. As far as the match, I think it's going to be an up and down affair, and it's going to be entertaining. While it was a 3-0 loss to DC United last week, if you sat down and watched that match, Charlotte had a lot of really good opportunities in there. There were some unfortunate breaks, some really bad, what I thought at least, VAR decisions that went against them. And then DC United capitalized on some lucky bounces of the ball. So while, there's been a lot made of Charlotte's coach's comments about the roster before the year, I think it's a little bit better, at least from that first match, than I was expecting. And personally, any chance to go see Chicharito is going to be fun as well. So it was a can't miss event for me.
Yeah, like Ben in the chat, 2 Mexican giants going head-to-head in Chicharito and Daniel Rios.
The matchup we've all been waiting for.
Yeah, just everybody has been waiting for this. Is there a new stadium? Are there plans for that in Charlotte?
Not that I've ever seen. They just sunk, I think it was like $50 million into renovations for Bank of America. So I've got to imagine that they'll be there for quite a long time.
It's a similar situation to like Seattle or Atlanta with David Tepper on board in the Charlotte ownership group. So I think MLS looks more favorably on using an NFL stadium if the owner is the same for both teams.
Personnel-wise, Ben or Chris, have y'all noticed anything about, just anything that stands out about the way Charlotte has built this thing out?
I mean, they've really missed on some DPs. Tom Bogert talked about it when he came on last week, just how they looked to sign two kind of high-profile attacking players, and they both fell through within a couple days. So, I mean, they've had plenty of issues. COVID has not made it any easier. I think it's been a weird time to set up an expansion team. But I mean, their manager was like kind of The Athletic talked about him as the best manager you've never heard of. He's kind of widely respected around the world. I think long term, I think they'll be okay. But expansion years are just tough. I think Nashville their expansion year was kind of the outlier. So it might take Charlotte a little while to get going. But I think long term, I think there's a lot of reason to be optimistic.
Guys, anything we left out here before we get out? All right. Nashville SC at Minnesota United Saturday at 5 o'clock kickoff. Will is on the call, the iHeartRadio app. Listen in to the digital feed alongside Kelly Glendenning. Looking forward to it. Match day number 2 coming up this weekend. This has been fun. Ben, show us the Crocs.
I can't. I'm not that flexible. I can't pull my feet up in front of the
Okay,
camera.
then take them off your feet and show them to us.
Okay, here. Everybody, this is the moment you've all been waiting for.
Ooh,
glorious white
Nice.
Crocs.
they're
Yeah.
white. Oh, they're kind of fresh, Ben. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
For Ben
We'll see if I
Wright,
can pull it off in the press box.
Chris Ivey, Will Bowling, and producer Andy Simmons, I'm Lucas Panzica. This has been Speedway Soccer, and we'll talk to you next week after Nashville takes on Minnesota United on Saturday.
Never go full shepherd.
Nope.